Yeah, I think everybody's.
Everybody
Fix the.
calling somebody if you change the
Jeez. So now if you want. No. Okay.
Right.
Sure.
Good afternoon and welcome to the May Crop Production and WASDE briefing. My name is Lance Honig and I am the chair of the Agricultural Statistics Board at NASS. This briefing is for the Secretary of Agriculture and other policymakers at USDA to better understand the content and context of today's reports. We're very pleased to have Dr. Justin Benavidez, USDA's chief economist, joining us as Secretary Designate today. Before I turn things over to our presenters, I do have a few notes for our live streaming audience. The crop production and WASDE reports are considered principal federal economic indicator reports. The Office of Management and Budget provides specific guidance on how these important reports are to be released. OMB statistical policy instructs policymaking officials to refrain from making public comment regarding the content of these reports within 30 minutes of their release. Therefore, we will not be taking questions from the public during this briefing. Both NASS and World Board staff are available for phone or email questions, and NASS will host a social media event at 1:30 Eastern Time this afternoon. We strive to have everything presented at this briefing match the official record. However, should there be any discrepancy, always refer to the official published estimates. With that, I'll turn things over to Anthony Perlman. He is the acting chief of the NASS Crops Branch. Anthony will be immediately followed by Dr. Mark Jekanowski, chair of the World Ag Outlook Board. Anthony.
All right, thank you, Lance, and good afternoon. Too want to welcome those who have joined us today on the live stream. So I will be covering several items, including winter wheat, hay stocks, as well as almonds and peaches. And at the end of the briefing, we will discuss the final cotton estimates for the 2025 crop year. All right, before we get to the numbers in today's report, let's first look at some of the data sources that we use to establish the estimates. Now, for winter wheat and hay stocks, we conducted our Ag Yield Survey, which is an operator-reported survey. The sample size was 7,350 with data collection occurring between April 29th and May 7th. Now, for this survey, we asked producers to report their expected harvested acres and yield for winter wheat as of May 1st. We also asked them to report the amount of hay they have stored on their operation on May 1st. Now, in support of the winter wheat estimates, we also conducted our objective yield survey. Now, for this survey, instead of surveying farmers to survey wheat fields, we send trained enumerators into the fields to take plant and head counts. They go back to the same fields each month throughout the growing season to continue making counts. And as the crop matures, heads are clipped and sent to the NASS Objective Yield Lab for analysis. Now, the month of May marks the start of the NASS Winter Wheat Objective Yield Program, and field work occurred between April 24th and May 1st. Now, in May, the sample size of 257 is fairly small, but we use a phased approach and enumerate more samples as the crop develops across the winter wheat growing region. Now, this month, we only conducted the survey in Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. And in these three states, we only enumerated half the samples. In June, we will enumerate all the samples in these three states, as well as half the samples in the other 7 objective yield states. And then once July rolls around, we'll be doing the complete objective yield sample, and that sample number is 1,155. All right, this map shows how those 7,350 ag yield samples we discussed on the previous slide are distributed across the U.S. As you can see, the larger sample sizes represented by the darker shade of orange are in the nation's major winter wheat producing states. All right, on this slide, we are showing the percent of usable responses collected each day during the data collection window for the May Ag Yield Survey, and how 2026, which is represented by the orange bars, compares with the previous 2 years. And as you can see, data collection this year was very similar to what we saw in both 2025 and 2024. All right, before we look at the winter wheat acreage, yield, and production forecasts that were included in today's report, let's look at the current condition and development of this year's crop. Now, the information presented in this slide comes from our weekly crop progress and condition survey. Each line on the graph represents the percent of the crop rated in good to excellent condition between 2021 and 2026. And then the red line represents the current year. Now, as of May 3rd, which represents the closest rating condition to the May 1st survey reference date, 31% of the acreage was rated in good to excellent condition compared to 51% in these two categories at the same time last year. However, the most recent rating on May 10th showed a decline with 28% rated in good to excellent condition. And then comparing this year's conditions to the previous 5 years, you can see conditions declined over the winter months and are now at the lower end of this particular range and similar to what we saw in both 2022 and 2023. All right, let's now look at how this year's crop is developing by looking at how the percent headed compares to the previous 5 years. This data also comes from our weekly crop progress and condition survey. And again, 2026 is represented by the red line. Now, 49% of the acreage was headed on May 3rd compared to 37% at the same time last year and the 5-year average pace of 32%. So development is running ahead of the normal pace. And this is the final slide we're showing before we actually get into the numbers in today's report. Now, on this slide, we are combining two data sources to show potential impacts of winter wheat due to drought or abnormally dry conditions. The first data source is the shading from the April 28th drought monitor. The legend in the bottom left corner of the slide notes the severity of drought and dryness in areas of the country. The second data source is shown as blue dots. This information comes from the 2022 Census of Agriculture, with each dot representing 10,000 acres of winter wheat acres harvested. Now, as you can see on the map, many of the major winter wheat producing states are experiencing abnormally dry conditions or drought. All right, let's now look at the winter wheat numbers published in today's report. U.S. planted winter wheat acres are estimated at 32.4 million. That is unchanged from the March estimate, but down 2.2% from last year. Harvested acres in the U.S. are forecasted just over 22 million. That is down 13.7% or nearly 3.5 million acres from last year. If realized, this will be a record low harvested area for the U.S. As of May 1st, yield is forecast at 47.6 bushels per acre. That is down 13.3% or 7.3 bushels from the previous year. And then production is forecast at nearly 1.05 billion bushels. That is down 25.3% from 2025. And then just as a reminder, May represents the first NASS forecast for winter wheat harvested acres, yield, and production. So that is why you see an NA for the change from the previous estimate. And then lastly, that bottom table on the slide shows the top 5 winter wheat producing states in 2026 and how the numbers compare to the previous season. All right, looking at the U.S. planted and harvested winter wheat numbers graphically across the past 10 years, you can see how this year's numbers compare historically. You will also notice the gap between the planted and harvested number is larger this year compared to the previous 2 seasons, indicating a larger number of acres not harvested for grain. All right, this slide is showing the winter wheat harvested to planted acreage ratio across the past 10 seasons. This year's ratio is currently forecast at 67.9%. As you can see, it's the second lowest ratio on the chart, and in fact is the second lowest ratio since 1933. So again, just showing the amount of abandonment we're looking at for this year's crop. All right, let's now look at the current harvested acreage forecast by state. Let me give an overview of how to read this map, since we will use this same layout throughout the presentation. The top number in each state represents the value as indicated in the title. For this map, that is the state's current harvested acreage forecast. The bottom number represents the percent change from the previous year. States colored in blue are showing an increase from the previous year, whereas the states colored in red are showing a decrease. And then the darker the shade, the greater the percent change. States colored gray are unchanged from 2025. And then if you see a pound sign beside that top number, that represents a record high for that particular state, whereas an ampersand represents a record low. Now, looking across the country, you will see that most states are down in 2025, with the only exceptions in Pennsylvania and Washington. And we are not forecasting any record highs this year, but are forecasting record low harvested acreage in Indiana, Nebraska, and Virginia. All right, looking at the average U.S. Yield over the past 30 years with the trend line yield plotted, you can see how this year's forecasted yield of 47.6 bushels is the lowest since 2022 and below trend. All right, this map is comparing how the current yield forecast compares to the previous year by state. As you can see, yields are down or unchanged in all states except Pennsylvania. And then as of May 1st, we are forecasting record high yields in Michigan and Pennsylvania. All right, looking at production over the last 10 years, you can see how this year's forecasted production of 1.05 billion bushels compares to the previous 9 seasons. If realized, this year's production would be the lowest in the U.S. since 1965. All right, taking a look at the winter wheat production by class, hard red winter wheat at nearly 515 million bushels is down 36% from last season. Soft red at nearly 301 million bushels is down 14.7% from last year. And then white winter at nearly 232 million bushels is down 5% from 2025. All right, let's now look at how today's NASS production forecast compares to pre-report industry expectations. As a reminder, each blue dot on the chart represents an individual industry member's published expectations of winter wheat production, and then the red square represents the NASS production forecast of 1.05 billion bushels. And then as you can see, the NASS forecast falls well below the range of expectations. All right, next we'll move on to the May 1 haystock estimates. As a reminder, each year NASS publishes haystock estimates as of December 1st and May 1st. This year's May 1 haystocks are estimated at nearly 23.3 million tons. That is down 3.3% from the same time last year. And then disappearance from December 1st, 2025 through May 1st, 2026 totaled 58.4 million tons. That is 2% higher when compared to the same period last year. And this map highlights those May 1 haystocks by state, and it compares it back to the same time last year. I will point out that record low May 1 haystocks were estimated in Connecticut, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island. All right, today's report also includes the first forecast for peach production, specifically in the state of California. Production in that state for 2026 is forecast at 480,000 tons. That is down 9.8% from the previous season. The anticipated drop in production is mainly due to the shutdown of a large processor in that state. And then as a reminder, we will publish forecasts for the other peach estimating states later this year. All right, staying within the state of California, we also released the first 2026 forecast for almonds. Now, I will note that for the first time, today's report includes both bearing acreage and yield for California almonds. In the past, the report only included the production forecast. Looking at the numbers, bearing acreage is forecast at 1.39 million acres. That is down 0.7% or 10,000 acres from the previous season. Yield is forecast at 1,940 pounds per acre. That is equal to the 2025 average yield. And then production at 2.7 billion pounds would be down 6%, would be down 0.6% from last year if realized. Now, as I mentioned at the start of the briefing, today's report also includes the final acreage yield and production estimates for the 2025 cotton crop. Planted acres at 9.28 million are unchanged from the previous estimate, but down 17% from 2024. Harvested acres at 7.83 million acres are up 0.3% from the previous estimate and up 0.9% from 2024. Yield at 852 pounds per acre is down 0.5% or just 4 pounds from the previous estimate and down 4.5% or 40 pounds per acre compared to the 2024 average yield. And then lastly, production at nearly 13.9 million bales is down 0.2% from the previous estimate and down 3.6% from 2024. All right, this slide just highlights a few of the upcoming reports NASS will be releasing over the next month and a half. Later today, we'll be releasing our cattle and sheep county estimates, as well as the cotton county estimates. May 22nd, cattle on feed, as well as rice and peanut county estimates. May 29th, the ag prices. June 1st, our CARES report. Be back here on June 11th for the next crop production report. And then we will wrap up June with the hogs and pigs report on June 25th and the acreage, grain stocks, and rice stocks on June 30th. So as mentioned earlier, Lance will be on X at 1:30 today for Stat Chat, answering questions about the numbers in today's report. So that concludes today's NASS briefing, and I will turn it over to Mark.
All right, thank you, Anthony. Okay, let's talk about the WASDE. Main WASDE report. So these are the first official new crop forecasts for the new forecasts for the new crop year, and also first annual calendar year forecasts for livestock and dairy. Obviously still very tentative at this point. I'd say 100% likelihood that the final numbers are going to be different from what we're putting up today. There's a lot, obviously, a lot still to happen in the marking year, weather and otherwise. So these numbers also incorporate the winter wheat production forecast we heard about just a moment ago from Anthony. And then we're going to talk a little bit about Brazil's corn production and North African wheat production as well. So let's go ahead and get started with global wheat production. And we're going to focus here on the 26-27 year, the new year. You'll see a fairly significant tightening of global wheat supplies for this new year, led by sharp reduction in the US, which you just heard a lot about over the last few minutes. And for most of these other countries, you'll see we're down in most of those countries, basically reverting to trend production from many of those countries, most of them really that had record or near record high production this past year. Countries like Australia, Canada, EU, Russia, all at or near record high production for the past year. We expect to be reverting back toward trend. Some increases for China and India, and then North Africa. We're going to talk a little bit more about pretty big increase this year for this year in terms of what we expect from North Africa's wheat production. This is just a map of the main wheat production areas in these three key countries: Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. But I will just note that the conditions I'm about to talk about extend far to the east as well. So North Africa into the Middle East, widespread, near ideal conditions for growing wheat. And just as an example, we'll kind of start at the western part of the region and go east from there. Just tremendous rainfall for this area of the country, well above average. And as you know, rainfall trace, so that black line represents average typical rainfall. The red line is what we're experiencing so far in 2026. So well above average and far above last year's conditions as well. Again, traveling toward the east, western Algeria, also very favorable rainfall conditions. Tunisia, right on average, generally above last year. So good conditions across that whole region, not too much heat either. Very little heat stress, really ideal conditions. And again, that extends much further into the east, into Turkey, Syria, and other countries as well. This is just a map that shows the percent of average seasonal greenness, a good indicator of the health of that vegetation, very strong across the region. So with that is driving that 4.9 million metric ton increase in our production forecast for this part of the world. So in terms of the global wheat supply and use balance sheet, again, focusing just on those green numbers, the changes for the new crop year from 2025, 2026. Production down overall, we talked about that. Feed use down 7.2 million tons, reflecting that tighter production situation. So total use down as well. Trade, global wheat trade down fairly substantially, 12 million metric tons. Couple things driving that. First of all, tighter supplies, but also importantly, we just talked about North Africa and Middle East. Those are major wheat importing regions. So with their large crops there, that's going to reduce some of their import demand. We're forecasting lower exports for almost all major exporters except for Russia and Ukraine. And the decline for this new crop year is led by the decline in exports for this new crop year is led by reductions in US and Argentina. So with the US balance sheet, again, this is incorporating the numbers we just heard about a few minutes ago for winter wheat. And when we talk about total US wheat production, we have winter wheat and also spring wheat, of course. So the winter wheat numbers are what we just heard about a few minutes ago based on the survey. But for spring and durum, we're still relying on prospective plantings and trend yields for that part of the production. So again, for that new crop year, tighter supplies, lower production. Translates into reduced exports, reduced ending stocks, generally lower forecasts for almost all of the use categories for the new crop year. And with those tighter supplies, higher prices. So we're currently forecasting season average market price for wheat, all wheat at $6.50 per bushel, up $1.50 from this past year. Real quick on the back year, 2025, 2026, a few adjustments there. You'll see we reduced food use by 7 million bushels. That is based on the recent flour milling report from NAS. And then exports, we raised 10 million bushels, and that is reflecting recent export pace for hard red spring and white. Seeing some strength there. All right, so let's move next into global rice production. Worldwide, again, focusing on 2026, 2027, we're looking at the first global decrease in rice production in several years. We've had several years of increasing rice production, but now with generally lower prices, that's going to pull back global production to some degree across many of these main exporting countries. Also worth noting, India, we reduced year-over-year reduction in production of about 2 million tons. India has had several, I almost lost track of how many years of records in a row of rice production. So at least at this early stage, we're going to assume not another record, and we're forecasting a 2 million ton reduction there, and all of the other changes are relatively small. The US is one of the largest ones, the largest reduction. We'll talk about that in just a couple slides. In terms of the global rice balance sheet, on the back year, 2025, 2026, rice trade, we pulled back 1.2 million tons. That's a reduction in India this month. But for the new crop year, 2026, 2027, we see global rice trade increasing to a new record, 63 million metric tons. Total use, also a record, led by India, where we anticipate higher domestic use for their public distribution food, food for low-income individuals in India. More rice use going into that program. Ending stocks tightening up globally. And also domestic use in China also going down by 2 million. Trade, higher exports out of India for that new crop year, and ending stocks down, led again by India, reflecting higher domestic use, higher exports, and lower production there. So the U.S. rice balance sheet, we'll start again with the out year, 2026, 2027. Planted area down, this of course, based on the prospective plantings report. It's mainly a reduction in long grain area, lowest since the 83-84 crop year. Trend yields, so it's tightening up production by about 31.5 million hundredweight. Lowest U.S. rice production in about 30 years. And with those tighter supplies, again, most of the demand side of the balance sheet components tightening up as well. Lower U.S. domestic use. Exports forecast down year over year, particularly reduced exports of long grain. Ending stocks down by about 12 million hundredweight, reflecting that lower production. Exports, ending stocks down, and U.S. domestic use down as well. Now for the back year, 2025, 2026, just kind of truing up to some recent trade data. Lowered our import forecast again this month by 2 million hundredweight. That is lower imports, long grain from Thailand. Exports, we reduced 1 million hundredweight. That we've been reducing long grain export forecasts for a while. This month, this is a reduction in medium short grain exports, and tightening up ending stocks by 1 million hundredweight on the back year. Season average market price, no change for the back year, but for the out year, we're currently forecast at $13.50 for the all rice price. That would be up $1.40 from this current marketing year. All right, moving into corn. Here I'm going to start with the 2025-2026 crop year, back year as we call it. Increase in global production, led primarily by Argentina and Brazil. We're going to talk a little bit more about Brazil in a minute, but Argentina in particular, that is mainly higher area, and that is supported by the fact that we've seen extremely strong exports from Argentina. Exports at a level that suggests that production had been underestimated, and indeed some reports from within Argentina are also suggesting that area is in fact higher than most people had been expecting. So that 7 million ton increase for Argentina is reflecting that higher area, given indications of use and other indications from within the country. Brazil, good conditions there. I have a few slides to talk about that. And for the other countries, Ukraine, Russia, South Africa, et cetera, we're just truing up to official data on the back year. Now looking ahead for 2026, 2027, global corn production down a fair amount to over 17 million tons, led by a big reduction in the US, as you can see there. But still globally, this would be the second largest corn production on record. And then for the out year, for the most part, these are crops that haven't even yet been planted. For Brazil, we're forecasting an increase of about 4 million tons based on expected higher area and trend yields. And China, pretty big increase there, 5.8 million tons, reflecting increased area expectations. So let's talk real quickly about Brazil. As you know, there's basically two main crops in Brazil. The first crop, which at this point has already been harvested. Second crop that typically goes in after soybeans, and that crop harvest will begin in a few weeks. That second crop is actually the much more important of the two, accounts for roughly 80% of Brazil's production. And what we've seen here over throughout the growing season, reasonably good precipitation. That red line, of course, is this year, 2026, up a bit from last year. I will warn you though, not to read too much into these rainfall traces as they apply to production, because this is Brazil. This is their rainy season. So you look at even 2025, it looked like precipitation was well below average, but they had a record crop. So generally speaking, this is a rainy season. They're getting plenty of rain. And if you look at the scale, these are still massive amounts of rain, compared to many other parts of the world. So anyway, but going into this year, we're looking at generally good precipitation in Mato Grosso, and which accounts for the bulk. Mato Grosso accounts for the bulk of about 50% of the second crop corn harvest. Percent of normal precipitation, we have seen some, small pockets of dryness in parts of Brazil, but generally good prospects throughout the country, especially Mato Grosso, which again accounts for the bulk of that production. And another way we can look at it is with the NDVI anomaly. So this is essentially showing the difference in the NDVI from normal conditions, and generally good across the major growing regions. So with that, based on that information, we raised our yield expectations for Brazil on that second crop. Still expected to be to lag last year's record production, but where we're at right now would put Brazil's crop at the fourth largest on record. So for the corn global balance sheet, let's start with the back year, 2025, 2026. Seeing still good, strong global demand overall. Trade, you see on the back year, we raised 6.3 million metric tons. That is mainly an increase in Argentina, as I noted earlier, very strong exports from there. Ending stocks up 2.1 million metric tons. That mainly reflects some revisions we made in Brazil going back a few years, which more than offsets lower ending stocks in Argentina, China, and the U.S. For the new crop year, looking ahead, we're expecting continued growth in global consumption, especially in China, Brazil, Vietnam, India, and Mexico. Trade, global trade, so exports, down year over year, 6.7 million metric tons. That's mainly lower exports from the US and Argentina. Ending stocks down almost 20 million tons. That's mainly lower stocks in China and the US. And speaking of the US, let's turn to that balance sheet next. On the back year, 2025, 2026, again, minor changes, just truing up to more recent use data, especially for the food, seed, and industrial category. Reducing that 15 million bushels with an offsetting increase in ending stocks by the same amount. For the new crop year, production down over a billion bushels. Again, as you know, so that production forecast is based on prospective plantings for acreage and then historical planted to harvest ratios and trend yields. So production at just under 16 billion bushels, down about 6%. Total supplies not down quite as much because of that increase in beginning stocks that carry over from the current crop year. In terms of use categories, food, seed, and industrial, ethanol, steady there. Pretty inelastic demand that don't expect much change there. But we do, with the tighter supplies, we expect reduced feed and residual use, exports, and ending stocks. And with that a little bit tighter supply and use ratio, that should give some price support into that new marketing year. We have season average price currently forecast at $4.40 per bushel, up 25 cents from this year. All right, soybean production globally. Here we'll focus on the out year, 2026, 2027. So global soybean production up nearly 14 million tons. The US accounts for a large part of that. We'll talk about that soon. And then for South America, generally we expect regular area growth and trend yields supported by favorable prices. Now again, across those South American countries, those are crops that are not planted yet. They won't be planted until toward the end of this year. So still a long ways to go before these forecasts are realized. And on the back here, that change in India, that is just an update based on some data from India itself. In terms of the global soybean balance sheet, small changes on the back here, not much of a story there to talk about. But on the out year, so the 2026, 2027, those green numbers, total supply up. We talked about that already, led by the US. Crush up as well, reflecting that higher production. And very strong demand for soybean oil, worth noting there as well. Global trade up overall, where higher exports from the US are partially offset by slightly lower exports out of South America. But overall global trade up 2.7 million tons for the new crop year. With the US balance sheet, on the back years, so 2025, 2026, we raised crush 20 million bushels. As you know, very strong crush margins supporting that very active crush in the US. And with higher crush, that squeezes out a little bit of exports and also tightens up ending stocks. So ending stocks tightening up by 10 million bushels, exports down by the same amount. Season average market price, we raised 10 cents per bushel just based on recently observed prices to date, recent strength there. Now for the new crop year, 2026, 2027, again, production based on prospective plantings and trend yields. So production up 173 billion bushels in the new crop year. Crush up 120 million bushels. Very strong demand, domestic demand for soybean oil. And also we're seeing strong domestic demand for meal and also meal exports. Exports overall for the new crop year, we expect to rebound. Maybe not quite to levels that they were a few years ago, but a rebound from this past year, up 100 million bushels to just over 1.6 billion bushels of exports. Ending stocks tightening up a little bit, 30 million bushels, and our season average price for the new crop year is currently forecast at $11.40. That would be up $1 per bushel from the current marketing year. And just real quick, I'm not going to go through all these numbers, but this is the soybean oil balance sheet. Just worth pointing out the year over year large increase in soybean oil for biofuel, up 3.6 billion pounds. Strong domestic demand driven by the RVOs. And then prices as well, that's also worth noting. So for the current crop year, we raised this month 4 cents per pound to 63 cents per pound. And looking ahead to next year, again, reflecting that very strong domestic demand for soybean oil, we're currently forecasting a 70 cent per pound price for soybean oil. That would be up 7 cents per pound year over year. All right, and cotton. So on the back year, relatively small changes. Argentina down a bit. That's just some numbers from the Ag Ministry there. Uzbekistan raised this month almost 1 million bales, 900,000 bales. That mainly is reflecting some recent data, recent information from Post, suggesting higher yields in Uzbekistan, reflecting some technological improvements adopted from China, supporting yields and production there. Into the new crop year, Brazil, we reduced, Brazil is forecast production to be down about 2 million bales year over year. This is reflecting current information from CONABI, lower area and yield. Now in this case for cotton, for Brazil, this is a crop that is soon to be harvested. So unlike corn and soybeans, where we're looking far into next year, in this case for cotton, this crop will begin to be harvested in the weeks ahead. Australia down, that crop, Australia's been under some drought conditions, and in this case, Southern Hemisphere, that crop has not been planted yet. China, cotton production forecast down 2.3 million bales. A couple things going on there. One, we expect a policy-driven reduction in area in the main producing area of Xinjiang, and also a return to a little bit more normal yields. You'll recall they had at least 2 years in a row of extremely high record yields, so we expect some reversion to trend there. Those two combined to reduce China's production year over year by about 2.3 billion bales. For the global cotton balance sheet, on the back year, that increase, that 1 million bale increase in consumption for 2025, 2026, that is driven by that increase in production in Uzbekistan. They're producing more, they're going to consume more within country. For the out year, 2026, 2027, consumption expected to be up 1.6 million bales year over year, led by China and India. So higher consumption from those two countries as they draw down some of their stocks to use in consumption. And as they're drawing down those stocks, that's gonna reduce global trade to some degree. So global trade for the new crop year down 400,000 bales, mainly reflecting lower imports as China and India draw down their own stocks. Global ending stocks also tightening up 5.4 million bales, reflecting tighter stocks in the US, China, Brazil, and India. US balance sheet. Here we'll focus on new crop year. Again, planted area from prospective plantings. Here for harvested area, we're basically basing our harvested area on roughly a 10-year average abandonment rate for cotton. Brings the harvested area down to about 7.38 million acres. Trend yields, small increase up to 866 pounds per acre. So production overall with that lower harvested area down about 600,000 bales. Total supplies, we're carrying in some stocks, so total supplies down by about 200,000 bales. Exports we raised for the new crop year up by about 300,000 bales year over year, reflecting higher global demand for cotton from the US and Brazil. And with those higher exports and tighter supplies, ending stocks tighten up by about 500,000 bales to 3.9 million. And we've seen some recent, as you know, a lot of real strength in cotton prices lately. So with that, for the back year, we raised our season average price 2 cents per pound to 63 cents per pound. And then looking ahead to the new crop year, expecting this strength to continue, our current season average price forecast is at 73 cents per pound. All right, sugar. Kind of a lot going on, as there always is in sugar. I'm gonna start with the back year because the changes there are pretty important. In terms of production, beet production, we lowered 40,000 short tons this month, just reflecting relatively poor recovery as the beet slicing campaign comes to an end at the end of the season here. Cane production, on the other hand, up 11,000 tons. This is based on some processor reporting that's suggesting again that maybe the damage from the frost in February wasn't quite as devastating, quite as bad as originally thought. So that crop is coming in a little bit better than expected. Now, in terms of the other supply components, imports, you'll see we raised our high tier sugar import forecast by 141,000 short tons. Couple things here. It's a normal forecast for refined sugar, but we're also seeing some industry indications of intentions to import more raw sugar as well, reflecting very, relatively tight cane sugar stocks. So there's a little bit of a difference between the supply situation for cane versus beet. In this case, those relatively tight cane stocks are expected to attract in more sugar at the high tier. So that is reflected in that 141,000 short ton forecast increase in high tier imports. So it's all added up. Ending stocks for the current crop year rise by 113,000 short tons. And then for the new crop, and of course that carries into the new crop year. But then for the new crop year, there's a lot going on here as well. Beet production, currently we forecast down nearly 300,000 short tons from the current year. And again, this is based on prospective plantings for area, but also the fact that we're watching the pace of plantings, and that's they're having a hard time getting the crop in. It's been dry in a lot of areas, so the crop is going in very slow. The slower it goes in, the later it goes in, the bigger impact that typically has on yields. So lower yields expected given the relative pace of planting. And then for cane production, forecast down about 130,000 short tons from last year. And that's driven by the fact that some of that freeze damage that I mentioned earlier from late January, early February, some of that crop that was damaged was intended for this upcoming year's harvest. So we expect to see some reduced production because of that. Then in terms of sugar imports, TRQ imports up year over year. We're just anticipating a little bit less of a TRQ shortfall there. High tier imports for that forecast, we're assuming no raw sugar coming in at the high tier, kind of reverting back to our process of forecasting just processed sugar and then reporting raw sugar as it arrives. And then since this is May, this is a month where we target our 13.5% stocks to use ratio to determine the level of imports allowed from Mexico. So with that 13.5% stocks to use, that suggests imports from Mexico of just over 1 million short tons, up 826,000 from this current year. And in terms of the Mexico balance sheet, small changes on the back year, seeing some relatively strong yields in sugar recovery. So that's driving that increased production forecast for this month, and that higher production goes straight into exports. Exports to third countries, of course, not to the US for the back year because they have already met their US needs for imports from Mexico. Now for the out year, some small forecast changes in production. The main item here to note, exports overall down 94,000 metric tons, but that total amount 895,000 metric tons that from Mexico, that is all coming to the US under this scenario. And consumption lowered as well based on information from the embassy and some taxes on sugar and other things that are affecting demand there. All right, let's move into meat and livestock. Starting out here with beef production. So here I'm going to start with the current calendar year, 2026, and then extend into 2027. So for the current calendar year, beef production lowered 240 million pounds, just based on observed lower marketings and slow placements into feedlots. That's expected to that pattern is expected to continue into 2027, resulting in a year-over-year reduction in beef production of about 240 million pounds. Maybe also driven by expecting to see some heifer retention as well. For pork, not much change for 2026, but then going into 2027, production up, driven there by larger pig crops. So it's really a productivity-driven increase there, continued increase in pigs per litter. Broilers and turkeys for 2026, just kind of truing up for recent slaughter and hatchery data. And broiler production in particular, we expect to be strong into 2027, reflecting strong consumer demand and good production margins. In terms of prices, steer prices, as you know, and we continue to observe very strong prices, despite the slower slaughter that I referred to earlier. So 2026 steer prices, we raised $8 per hundredweight and expect that strength to continue into next year. Currently, prices are forecast up just over $4 per hundredweight year over year. Hog prices for 2026, we pulled our forecast back a bit, 75 cents per hundredweight, just based on some recently observed prices. We're seeing a little bit less of a seasonal bump in prices that we would normally see this year. And then for 2027, prices forecast down $1.88 based on that higher production forecast. Broilers of 2026, just truing up to recently observed data. Turkey prices up as well. Turkey prices up for 2026 as well. But for 2027, turkey prices were projecting a relatively sharp price decline on increased supplies and a return to more seasonal price patterns. Weaker at the beginning of the year, stronger later in the year. And in broiler prices for next year, we expect to remain strong based on strong demand. U.S. meat trade for the 2026 small changes. Pork in particular, we raised our pork export forecast. We're seeing some strength, especially in Western Hemisphere markets, and we expect that to carry into 2027. So year over year increase in pork exports, as you can see there. Beef exports for 2027, we expect to be down a bit, mainly reflecting those much tighter supplies. And broiler exports for 2027, we're forecasting down a bit as well, reflecting strong competition from Brazil, as well as strong domestic demand for chicken in the U.S. Imports, beef imports, you see we raised pretty strongly this month for 2026. We saw very strong imports of beef in March, particularly from Brazil and Australia. And I expect that to continue for some months ahead. And then for 2027, though, we're expecting a little bit of a decline in U.S. beef imports overall, as we expect to see tighter global supplies, as some of the other major beef producers start tightening up in their cattle cycle. All right, and wrapping things up here with dairy. Milk production for 2026 up, reflecting mainly across 2026 and 2027, seeing a continued growth in size of the herd. That's driving that increase in 2026, more than offsetting relative stability in milk per cow, and that extending into 2027 as well. Increasing milk production there. In terms of product trade, imports on a fat basis up a bit this month, but that mainly just reflects specialty products that specialty butters and other specialty cheeses and other products like that. The real story is on the export side, where we're very competitive on both butter and cheese. So strong fat basis exports raised this month for 2026 by 800 million pounds, expecting that strength to continue into 2027. And then on a skim solids basis as well, our export forecast was raised. That is driven especially by cheese exports. And finishing up with prices here. Cheese and butter prices, as I noted, were globally competitive, and we're seeing a little bit of slight weakness in butter prices, which is just going to increase that globally price competitive situation relative to other suppliers, and expecting that to continue or some strength to continue for cheese and butter prices into 2027. For dry products, non-fat dry milk for 2026, as you know, we're at record high prices. Really enormous strength over the past couple of months on non-fat dry milk. So that's raising that annual price forecast there. Dry whey as well. That's just reflecting strong protein demand. Looking into 2027, we expect supply and demand to come a little bit more into balance for those products. So some year-over-year declines in the prices of those products, but still relatively high overall. In terms of milk prices, Class 4 price for 2026 up $1.35 per hundredweight this month. That is driven by those record high non-fat dry milk prices. Class 3 prices up as well. That's driven by stronger whey prices. And then into next year, 2027, again, reflecting our product price forecast, Class 3 price up 55 cents per hundredweight. Class 3 price coming down, reflecting that moderation on the non-fat dry milk side. And all milk prices for next year down about 30 cents per hundredweight year over year at $20.95 per hundredweight. And that's where I'm going to end things. Thank you all for attending. I hope this was informative and useful. Again, it's our first forecast of the season. We're going to be following these balance sheets now for many months ahead and talking about them each month at this briefing. So thank you all who attended online. And with that, I will wrap things up.